What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp Podcast. I am here with Tim.
Your host with the most.
And Steve.
Hello.
And this is going to be our annual farewell episode to the non-playoff teams. We kind of did something similar last year where we took, one last look at the teams that are definitively and distinctly out of the playoffs at this point. Because from here on out, we're going to be talking only playoffs, only teams that are in the mix. And, by this time next week, by Wednesday of next week, we'll have not a complete picture, but a more succinct picture of what teams are actually in the playoffs and what teams are out of it. So we're just going to be talking about the teams that are definitely not making the playoffs. So the list, of teams that I consider that criteria was the Blackhawks, Red Wings, Jackets, the Sharks, Kings, Ducks, the Flyers, Devils, Sabres, and the Canucks and Senators. Obviously, there are teams that are kind of teetering on the brink, like the Flames.
I'd probably put the Flames on the outs just because it's 6 points back, and they don't have any games in hand anymore.
Like the Flames are teetering, the Yotes are teetering, the Stars have a couple games in hand, they're only 2 points out. But there's going to be some big games coming up. Like I said, by this time next week, we won't have a complete picture, I don't think, but we'll have a more defined picture. We'll kind of know more where teams are sitting because that is, it was the last week of scheduled play, and then teams that have COVID games to make up are using the week after that to make those games up. Like, I know the Islanders finished the season playing the Bruins because, they missed one of their games. So, I guess I'll start you off with a question. Out of these teams that are distinctly out of the playoffs, we'll do both sides. We'll do which team do you think is in the best position going forward, what team do you think is in the worst. But we'll start with the best. So, out of these teams that are not in the playoffs this year, what team do you think is in the best position organizationally? So maybe not a team that you think is going to make the playoffs next year, but which team is in the healthiest position going forward, you guys think?
It's got to be like this. It's really like a three-way tie for me personally. It's either the Kings, who have probably one of the deepest prospect pools in the league. Their center depth is disgusting when it's Alex Turcotte. I'm pretty sure
Byfield's making his debut tonight.
Yeah. What was the other kid they drafted? 10th, Gabriel Velarde was on the I don't know if he's still with the organization, but he was for a while. So they're really stocked up. Anaheim looks like they're in a good spot with Jamie Drysdale playing and Trevor Zegras in the lineup now. And Ottawa is just, they're just stockpiling talent. Timothy Stützle, Brady Tkachuk, Thomas Chabot, Eric Brandstrom. So I think they're all in varying levels of set up for success. I just think maybe Ottawa might be a little closer to competing than those other teams by way of having an earlier start,
What do you think, Tim? Who's in the healthiest position?
Okay, so I don't really know how healthy the position is because we don't know how healthy the position is from an outside perspective. But that Columbus Blue Jackets first overall pick baby sounds really fat.
Yeah, the only issue is I just don't see them getting a big benefit out of a top 5 pick because 3 of the top 5 players are all defensemen. I don't think they really need any more defensemen to draft. So it's
my only argument against the Jackets would be, as opposed to a team, my personal pick would be the Ottawa Senators because a lot of their young players are around the same age, between that 18 to 24 mark. So they're all going to be growing into the league together. They also have some established veterans, such as, technically speaking, at this point, Matt Murray would be considered a veteran.
Evgeny Dadonov.
Evgeny Dadonov would be considered a veteran.
They have
some veterans that can teach the younger guys, and they're all going to be growing into the league together, and at some point they're all going to be in a position to compete at the same time. By the time this team is ready to compete, your older players like Chabot, quote-unquote older player, Colin White, these guys that are quote-unquote older players are going to be 27, and then the younger guys are going to be 22, 23, which to me screams sustained success. You're going to have a long list of players that are coming up from the organization, growing into these roles as the team experiences more success. Whereas the Blue Jackets, Seth Jones and Zach Werenski, I think, are both 26, 27 at this point.
26, yeah. And I think they're both, one's an RFA next year, and then Seth Jones is a UFA next year, I'm pretty sure.
And, who knows how long that first overall pick can take to grow into the league. He could be one of those picks that steps into the league and is immediately impactful. He could be even if he's not as impactful as a Connor McDavid or Austin Matthews, somebody that's ready to play immediately, or he could take 3 to 5 years. So, the other issue with Columbus is you could make this argument about the Senators as well. I don't think the Senators coaching staff is established yet. I don't really think DJ Smith is going to be there all that much longer. But it's very evident if Tortorella is in this organization next year, Patrick Laine is not. And if Laine stays in this organization, Tortorella is not. And replacing a coach like Tortorella isn't easy. Replacing a player like Laine isn't easy. So I think that they're a franchise that's in flux. They're in a very much where do we go situation.
Well, that's what I was saying. We can't tell from an outside perspective because we're not in the meetings, but I would presume that they have some plan going forward as to what they're aiming to do.
To be honest with you, I thought the same thing last year, 2 years ago, and they went in all at the deadline, and then I watched it all spectacularly explode in Jarmo Kekalainen's face, so I don't have a ton of confidence in that front office anymore. It's just a lot of the way they've handled, honestly, instead of trading Dubois, I really think Tortorella should have gone first. It was, you trade your number 3 overall pick to get the number 2 overall pick from the same year, but you're having the same issues that you had with that guy.
I think what makes that argument a little bit stronger is that this is a contract year for Tortorella too. If this wasn't a contract year, if this was the first year of a 4 or 5 year deal, you might give Tortorella the benefit of a doubt, but his contract's up at the end of the season. Is it really worth shuffling out a player like PLD for a guy who you might have second thoughts on signing at the end of the regular season, depending on how things go?
It really also didn't make sense to me when them moving Dubois. I understand why they moved Dubois, right? He obviously wasn't happy, but I don't understand why they chose that option to move the player, because it's always the idea, right? You can fire a coach, you can't fire a team, but in this case, that they bet against the player and pick the coach. But I just don't understand why you would do that when the guy's clearly your number 1 center. He's producing. He has all the potential to be a 30-goal scorer or a 90-point guy, and you don't really have any centers in the pipeline or really on the team to replace him with. They traded for Max Domi, but Max Domi's been a spectacular flop.
Well, what's actually an interesting part about that is that we thought that they were trying to go for the season when they went for Laine. We initially thought, because PLD was it's not that he wasn't producing, it's that he wasn't allowed to produce.
He just wasn't happy.
He just wasn't allowed to play. He got no ice time towards the end. He was.
He did that to himself towards the end because he just gave up playing too.
He did. He definitely cuffed himself a little bit, but I'm saying they definitely thought that Laine was going to be the jump in and boost, hopefully. And then it wasn't, so that was a...
The real upside, I guess, here, too, to them is, they have good goaltending, and their goaltending isn't old by any stretch. Joonas Korpisalo is, 25 years old, and Elvis Merzlikins is, 27 or 28.
Most of their team is in, that middle stretch of their career.
The issue is,
that early middle stretch.
The issue is, they just, dumped all their assets trying to get guys 2 years ago, and they knocked off the Lightning.
Yeah.
And it's just they emptied their shelves, essentially, their pantry, to get something to. It's essentially you gave somebody all of your food in the pantry because they gave you a Wendy's bag right now, and you essentially just traded that. But then 10 minutes later, you're left oh, well, now I have literally nothing in my pantry at all, and I ate my Wendy's, and it's all gone now. So they're kind of just left holding the bag,
Corpy and Merzlikins, just as a matter of clarification, they're both only 27. So. I think the issue, my personal issue with Columbus is this was very much a team that was built in the mold of a John Tortorella type coach, right? Your superstars, quote unquote, were guys like Nick Foligno.
Oh yeah,
and guys like at the time PLD, heavy checking power forward type players. You didn't really have a lot of out and out talent. Outside of obviously the defense, Seth Jones and Zach Werenski are undoubtedly some of the most talented defensemen in the NHL, but they played a very John Tortorella style, shot blocking, stick checking, that kind of game. Whereas when you look at the options at head coach right now, obviously you have Gerard Gallant, who's still outstanding. You could sign him, but this type of roster with a Gerard Gallant is going to need some kind of boost. It's going to need some kind of talent. And obviously the answer there would be Patrick Laine, but who's your first line center now. You're gonna need to either change the roster to match the coach or try a similar style of coach with the same roster. And I think option B is the wrong one if you're asking my opinion. I think they need an organizational switch up, I think.
I think so. Columbus, I think, like, their number one priority in this season should be going out to get a center to play with Patrick Laine, just because he's not a guy that generates offense on his own. He never has been. I mean, you saw it in Winnipeg. He was always complaining that he was playing with guys that didn't play up to his level because he's an Ovechkin-type player. He needs someone to give him the puck. He's not going to go out there and set it up himself. So if I'm Columbus and I'm looking to compete next year or even gets back into the conversation, I think that's really like the big piece I'd be looking for. And obviously, number one centers don't grow on trees, right? I mean, they have options in the draft. They have guys like, I think Matthew Savoie is in the draft this year. Atu Radi, which was supposedly the number one overall pick as far as 2 years ago and last year, but the guy's just been sliding out of rankings left and right. I mean, he's out of the top 10 now, I think. So, I mean, they have options, and they have guys like Liam Foodie and stuff growing into the game still, but it's tough. I mean, like, honestly, Brian Getzlav, David Krejci, not terrible stopgap options for a team like this. That's really not all that many pieces away from being competitive again. I mean, their defense is solid. They traded away David Savard, sure, but
and they have a perfect second and third line center in Domi and who is it? Is Bjorkstrand the second line center?
Oliver Bjorkstrand. Bjorkstrand's been playing wing on the first line, but I think he has played center at some point in his career.
Yeah, and
I think he was playing center earlier in the season.
What was the guy that went to bought out? He went to Florida and had like a resurgence this year. Oh my God.
Duclair?
No, it was a center. He wore number 10, Alexander Wenberg. Wenberg would have been, now you look at it now, it's like maybe you would have holding on to Wenberg would have been nice.
They have Jack Roslovic is the second line center right now.
Yeah, the thing with Roslovic is, like, I don't know if I'd bank on continue. Like, he's producing
he's
like
a third line center.
Yeah, but on this team, he's playing in their top six.
I'm saying if they bumped these their top two centers down, and like they got that first line center that we were talking about, they'd be in a perfect position.
Yeah,
because Max Domi is a great second line center.
Max Domi really is like the biggest enigma on this roster, I think, because like he had all that. He's got so much hype.
The issue is,
like,
as soon as he got to Columbus, he was in a doghouse. Like, he literally, his first game, he was benched, and not for nothing. Not to take anything away from Max Domi, but we saw it in Montreal when he was given the chance to play through his ruts, he played pretty well. Imagine being Max Domi. It's literally your first game in Columbus, and Tortorella's already benching you. Like, that to me. The Max Domi enigma this year, in my opinion, is 100% on Tortorella. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Same thing with Laine. I mean, Laine's been good for them, but not as good as he could have been, and it doesn't help when he went out there and scored 2 goals and then was benched in the third period. Like,
you guys know that I'm a huge fan of John Tortorella. I honestly consider him probably the second best coach in the National Hockey League. But I cannot defend him this year. He's made so many decisions that are super questionable. He's burnt so many bridges for this organization this year. I love the guy. I love Torts. I think he's a fantastic coach, but something went wrong this year, and instead of him adapting and overcoming like he normally does, he just doubled down on being John Tortorella, and it has not worked. And I cannot defend him for anything he's done this year. I
mean, I think it just is like Tortorella's nature. Like, he's not a coach meant for like a rebuilding or retooling team, really. He's a guy that's going to get you over the hump and get you to be competitive. I mean, that's what he's done his whole career. I mean, he did it in Tampa Bay, got them the Stanley Cup. He got the Rangers to a conference final, and then he got Columbus into probably one of the most favorable playoff positions I've ever seen, going from 8th, knocking off the 62-win team, and going into the second round, and then knocking off the Toronto Maple Leafs last year. So, I mean, I think Tortorella is a guy like Pat Burns, in that, like, Pat Burns always came in, did really well with his teams, and for like a short period, and then just immediately wore his welcome out, and everybody just hated him. And unlike Scotty Bowman, who for some reason everybody hated, but could always keep control of his team, you see it in Tortorella, like, guys are just...
It's almost like he gets too comfortable, and he just takes over, instead of like just as a coach, he takes over also as like a dad of the team. Whereas like he doesn't.
I think he just sends mixed signals a lot of times too.
He doesn't. I'm saying like he stops treating the team as like which as a coach, as much as it is like a locker room and a team feel, there's also like a business aspect to it in regard, and that like you're also playing for wins.
I think that's actually the issue, though, is Tortorella is too, like, assertive and business-like. Like, he doesn't see them as anything other than, like, his team. Like, he's protective of his players and he likes them, but, like, you can tell, like, he's not very open to, like, guys questioning him or guys, like, asserting their influence.
That's what I was saying. I think he plays like dad. Like, he's like, this is my house, these are my rules, and you're just going to play by it. And the second you step out of line, you're going to hit the line.
You know, it's funny that you bring up the whole Scotty Bowman thing because I'm still in the middle of reading The Game by Ken Dryden, and I actually mentioned to you at one point reading that book that, you know, Scotty Bowman, as much of a hard ass as he was, when the Montreal Canadiens would visit Toronto, Scotty Bowman allowed Ken Dryden to break team rules, quote unquote, and visit his hometown house and sleep at his house, right? As opposed to the hotel where most of the players were forced to be stationed at. So even Scotty Bowman, who was known as like the hardest coach, everyone hated playing for this guy, even he knew which strings to pull and which buttons to push, and when sometimes, and Ken Dryden notes this in his book, even sometimes at practice, Scotty Bowman knew when it was just time to let the boys play. And he said if they were having a bad practice, yeah, Bowman would get on their case and he'd yell and he'd scream, but if they were having a good practice, he wouldn't nitpick. He'd be like, all right, listen, like, it's time to just let them do their thing. And the issue is, yes, does John Tortorella have a team as talented as the 1976 Canadiens? Not even fucking close.
No.
But at the same time, you have to know when to put your foot on the gas, which buttons to push. And when it comes to, you know, I think the smoking gun this year is Patrick Laine, who we've always known, even in his time in Winnipeg, has been a streaky scorer. He'll go on a tear and score like 8 goals in 5 games, and then he'll go 6 games out of goal. But you have to let a player like him play it out, because he's not going to score goals by playing on third line.
He's not going to score goals on your bench either, you know?
And I think that's where Tortorella's missing the mark. He's not pushing the right buttons. He's not pulling the right strings. He's pulling the same string over and over again, and at this point, there's nothing connected to that string.
And I wonder if there's something to be said for, like, burnout. Just in terms of, like, not like in terms of, like, the mental burnout, which we were just talking about, like, the physical toll, like, his style of hockey takes on a team. Like, you saw it with the Rangers. I mean, like, not for nothing, Dan Girardi in the second half of his career was a much less effective player because, I'm not singularly blaming this, but, like, when you block over 200 shots a year, 4 or 5 years in a row, off your knees and ankles, you're not going to be that mobile by the time you're 33, 34.
No, he lost his offensive game.
Yeah,
and even Mark Stahl did too, but given he also put an eye patch on.
Yeah.
But
you know what I'm saying? So I wonder if Tortorella's like, you got to go out there and check. You got to go out there and block shots. You got to go out there and do this. And, like, to everybody, I wonder if at some point they're just like, okay, like, I'm over this. Like, I get it. You need us to play, like, a solid defensive game, but, like, at the same time, we're sacrificing so much offense to play this way.
I think it's a conjunction of 3 things. It's you're willing to play that way when it works,
and you're winning. Yeah.
When it works / when you're winning, and when you like the coach. When you like a coach, you'll do whatever you can for the guy. You'll sell out. You'll block a shot off your chin and then go back out for the next shift. But the exact opposite is also true. When you hate a coach and he's forcing you to block shots, you fall deeper into that hatred and you don't want to do it anymore. So I think it's like a mountain, right? Like, the first domino to fall is that the team stopped playing well, right? You go on a little bit of a slide, you lose a couple games. The second domino after that is players start going, Torts has been really hard on us lately. He's not letting us play out of the funk. I don't know so much about this. The third domino falls, which is where Torts doubles down. He's benching Patrick Laine. He's benching Max Domi. And then the fourth one falls, and everything else falls after that. All the players start turning on you. They don't like you anymore. They don't want to block shots. They're not playing your style. And then you're wondering why you're losing games, because the team's not listening to you anymore. You've lost the locker room.
You know what else it is, too? Like, Torts is very good at, like, fostering a us against them mentality, right? Like an us against the world, which you saw happen perfectly with the Columbus Blue Jackets. He's like, everybody's writing us off. Nobody expects us to do anything. And they go in there and sweep the Tampa Bay Lightning. And, like, it worked with the Rangers, too. Like, nobody thinks they're going to do anything. They finish first overall in the Eastern Conference, go to a conference final. But it doesn't work that way when it's like, oh, well, everyone's saying we're not going to do this and we're not that, and you look at Tortorella and go, yeah, because we're not that. Like it's very clear that we're not this, And you're much less willing, like you said, much less willing to block shots when you're feeling like you're blocking it for your coach and not for the boys, right? Like you don't go out there to like you sell out when you're like, all right, I'm going out there, putting my body on the line for the boys, like I'm going out there and we're doing it as a team. But it's like when you're just like all Torts wants me to do is block shots, and I can't stand it anymore. Like,
and I know I'm not getting ice time if I don't.
Yeah, so you're like, there's no point. Like, you're not. It's almost like you're not doing it for your team anymore. It's just like you're doing it because you feel like you have to, and like at some point, like you're just gonna stop doing that. It's like any other job. You're gonna cut corners.
Now, what I will say in defense of Tim's point about the Blue Jackets maybe being in the best position is, if you think about it in terms of, potential energy, right? They have a lot of potential here. I think if they go out this offseason, if they commit to a different coach of a different style, like let's say they go out and get a Gerard Gallant, who's known as
Elaine Vigneault.
No,
I'm just kidding. Follow the Ranger cycle. Ranger South.
If they go out and get a coach like Gerard Gallant, who's known as very much a player's coach. Players love playing for Gerard Gallant. There's a reason why, even though the team wasn't good and there was like next to no fans in the stands, that players went and played for the Florida Panthers because they love Gerard Gallant.
If you ever saw any of those interviews from those players, even though the teams are losing, like they always went to bat for him. They always stuck up for Gerard Gallant, those players.
And we saw with the Vegas Golden Knights. Players love playing for Gerard Gallant in Vegas. And the other positive to Gerard Gallant is his system's not overly complicated, which I think is why he had so much success with the Vegas Golden Knights. He plays a very simple brand of hockey. And when you look at this Blue Jackets roster, a talent-poor roster, simple hockey is going to work. I think that they need to commit to a different coach. If they go out and get a different coach and a first-line center, which arguably, like, outside of elite goaltending, a first-line center is probably the hardest thing to find in the NHL.
But there's some decent stopgaps in free agency this year,
If we're really looking at it, this free agency is actually some prime time to replace a first-line center.
I mean, I don't know if, like, Ryan Getzlaf or David Krejci are, like, number one centers anymore.
I mean, I just don't think Krejci's going to be going to free agency anyway.
Well, no, I think the Bruins are going to sign him. Well, they're going to have to pick either him or Taylor Hall. And, that's the real thing. Taylor Hall is, 27 now? And Krejci's 33, right? 35, so... But anyway, yes. But, like, Ryan Getzlaf, I think, would just be... I think Ryan Getzlaf would be the optimal pick just because, like, he fits in with that roster already. He's a big, heavy player, And a guy like that will flourish in a Gerard Gallant system because he's not going to expect much of him. He's going to expect him to go out there and play a solid, like, two-way game. And I think Getzlaf's got some gas left in the tank. I mean, I also don't think I don't know if he hits free agency just because...
I think he... Honestly, if I was the Ducks, I would, because at this point, you just need to let that... You need to to let the boat sink at
but there's
this point.
There's something to be said for keeping a guy like Getzlaf around, though. I mean, like, it's good to, like, foster younger players, and, like, he's the franchise, essentially, at this point.
The only reason they should keep Getzlaf is if they plan on playing Trevor Zegras next year. Because Getzlaf can teach Trevor Zegras the game.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, Zegras is already at the lineup, so...
Well, he's down in the minors now, but...
I mean...
If they don't plan on playing Zegras next season, like, if they sign Getzlaf and they decide, maybe Zegras needs a stint in the minors, like, just give him a full year, it would kind of be a waste of time, in my opinion. But I think that, one of the things... I mean, it's interesting. If you really wanted to be kind of not a dick about it, but if Paul Stastny goes to free agency, you could just reunite Stastny and Laine, but on the Columbus Blue Jackets.
You could reunite Andrew Kopp and...
Yeah, I mean...
Patrick Laine.
There's some interesting... I mean, they're really interesting pieces. I love that Elias Pettersson, by the way, is listed 17th on this list by way of scoring. Just because he's got 21 points in 26 games.
Because he's been hurt all year.
Yeah, thanks, Elias.
I think, if...
Oh, so actually, double backing at this list. The list is crazy, but the actual amount of people that are going is super low, probably.
Oh, super small, yeah.
Super small.
I mean, Kopp's not going to go.
Nuge.
Krejci's not going to go.
Batherson's not going to go.
Comtois not going to go. Granlund could.
Eriksson,
Ek is a toss-up. Spezza.
I don't think they'll get Eriksson Ek. He's
24 years old, 25 points.
He's part of the roster.
The only reason I say he might... he'd be RFN anyway, but the only reason they might trade him is it depends on how much money he wants, because he's had a pretty good season.
That's fair.
See, now
and, like, they're unlike the Vancouver Canucks, the bad contracts on the Wild are not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, no.
So
here's an interesting guy. I mean, Philip Deneau is hitting free agency. Everybody knows Philip Deneau is going to be UFA at the end of the year because Montreal can't afford to keep him. Is that a guy you pinpoint? I mean, he's never been a number one center in his career. He's usually like a number two, number three guy. But I think at the high end of his capabilities, I really think that Philip Deneau could be like a perfect number two center with like Selke Trophy upside. And I think that's. I mean,
I wouldn't say no to him. Like if my options are as limited as we think they're going to be, I wouldn't say no to Philip Deneau. Depending on
like how it shapes up, really.
It's so hard for me to say who is a good fit on his team because who's a good fit all comes down to who's wearing the suit behind the bench.
And what the rest of the roster looks like.
If you commit to John Tortorella, quite honestly, I think you're going to have a very hard time convincing any free agent, period, to come to the Columbus Blue Jackets.
So I have another. This isn't directly related to the Blue Jackets, but Pius Suter, right? He's listed here as an RFA. If you're like a team like Columbus or maybe Anaheim, somebody that's looking to add some like depth in their center pool, would you start him I know he's 25, but would you see if maybe you could swing something to pry him out of Chicago because they don't need him? I mean, they have Kirby Dach and Dylan Strome who are lined up to be number one, number two, and you have Johnny T, who's should be back next year, hopefully.
Is number one.
Yeah, he'll probably end up
healthy.
on that.
I mean, we still have no idea. We haven't heard anything.
If he comes back, I wouldn't be surprised though if he slides out of their top six, just because Kirby Dach might jump him on the lineup.
If Taze is playing, he's playing in the top six, I think.
Yeah, there's no way he's not top six.
The other issue is if Dach is healthy, he's also playing in top six.
And
now,
Dylan Strome's healthy, he's in the top six, so it's
when it comes to Pius Suter, I mean.
It's a high risk thing. I mean, he's only
the other issue is the Blue Jackets, realistically speaking, are a roster that should be competing now. They should be playing in the playoffs every year, taking those next steps, making the second round, making competitive second rounds. You could take a chance on Pius Suter, but my question is how much of his production is coming from Patrick Kane? It's like if we take Ryan Strome away from Artemi Panarin, how much of his production is Artemi Panarin? And I honestly would argue from what I've seen from Pius Suter, I think right now, I mean, he's only 25, but right now I think his ideal fit would be a third-line scoring center, which is not to take anything away from him. That's a great role to have, honestly. But for a team like the Jackets who... I mean, let's be honest here. They need a quick turnaround because if you commit to another 5-year rebuild, Zach Werenski and Seth Jones are going to be 31 by the time that's over.
They probably won't even stick around, honestly.
They'd still be in their physical prime, but at the very end of it, and your window would only be 2 to 3 years as opposed to 4 to 5, or realistically speaking, 6 to 7 if the team plays their cards right. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think they have a lot of potential for a rebound, but they have some hard decisions to make. And honestly, it starts and stops with Jarmo Kekalainen saying goodbye to John Tortorella. Because I hate to say it, if he's behind the bench next season, this team isn't going anywhere. They're just nobody wants to play for him. Line would probably hold out at that point or
force you to trade him.
Force a trade. I don't see this roster going anywhere because the bridge is gone. There's no bridge left. It's not like the match was just set to the bridge. The bridge is
smoking
gone.
tinder at this point. Yeah.
And they have a really good opportunity with which to let the coach go because there's an expansion team coming along who needs maybe a kind of tough love coach, So I think Columbus needs to let Tortorella go. I think that they need to address that first-line center issue, and if they do, I mean, I'll feel pretty good about them going into next year. Not Stanley Cup contenders because they still have some other issues in the roster that they need to address, but they'll be way better off next year than they would be this year with John Tortorella behind the bench. Which again, it sounds so odd to say, but it's just the reality of the situation.
So I know they're not technically out yet, but can we include the Calgary Flames in this episode just because this is a team that I feel like we should talk about. They're another team that's stuck in a weird spot. They have all this potential to go in 2 directions, but they're just floundering. Like they're trying to tread water right now, and it's not working.
They need scoring wingers, and they need scoring wingers really bad.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the top 6 of the Calgary Flames.
I know we harp on it all the time, like Dylan Dubé and Andrew Mangiapane.
And I don't want anybody to think that I'm talking down on those two players, but the reality of the situation is they aren't good enough. They're just not good enough.
Can we also talk about how Calgary seems to be like? I know like Edmonton had a reputation for being a coach killer a couple of years ago before the Connor McDavid era.
Cousin Huey.
Yeah, but like Calgary is literally a coach killer. Like they've gone through what, like 4 or 5 coaches in the last like.
What?
You all right there, bud?
Yeah.
They've been like shaking
No,
bacon.
it's like stretching out my muscles.
What's it called? They've gone through what, like 4 coaches now in the last like 3 years.
Well, I mean,
the
Montreal
one guy was
did
a
the same
racist,
thing this
but-
year. Montreal fired Claude Julien, thinking that the record was going to get better, and Ducharme has the exact same record.
I could have told you.
Like-
See, the thing, I always knew that the guy in I can't remember. I always screw his name up. Claude Julien. Like I knew he wasn't the right fit for them. Like you saw it in Boston when he had like a team that was significantly better, like built to play defensive hockey, built to play like Boston Bruins hockey, and he couldn't get them to compete. I mean, last time they missed the playoffs, he was coaching them. And they replaced him with Bruce Cassidy, who decided, hey, maybe like we should play some more scoring game, speed up a little bit and stop trying to trap everybody. And wow, look at that. The Bruins went to a Stanley Cup final.
I mean, I don't want to take anything away from what Mangiapane and Dubé have done. Mangiapane has 26 points in 48 games. Dubé has 17 in 43. But, I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Around 50 points, and then for Dubé, it's worse, around 30 points. It's not going to cut it on the second line. It it just isn't.
See, like, I don't know, like, I think Andrew Mangiapane's fine on a second line. Like, 50 points out of a second line player is kind of, like, ideal. It's pretty much what you're looking for, between 50 and 60 points out of these guys. So, like, for him to be in that pace isn't bad, but it's like when Michael Backlund is your number 2 center, it's not great. Their whole top 6 is kind of screwed up. Their whole top 9 is actually kind of screwed up, to be honest. Like, and then outside of that, you have your captain in Gio, who's now like, what, 37, 38 almost?
It's funny because I had such high hopes for this team coming into the year, and
didn't we all pick them to be like the best team in that Canadian division almost?
Lindholm's had a great season. Gaudreau has had a bounce back season. Monahan's had a bit of a down year, but that's also just because he's been playing with different, like they've been switching up the wingers. Kachuk's had a good season. I mean, it's hard to say because he's so young in his tenure, but I mean, maybe Suter's not the best fit for this roster because when you look at what Sam Bennett's been doing in Florida, it's clear that there was a coaching problem with Sam Bennett.
I mean, isn't that what I was saying, right? I was saying the Rangers should take a shot at a guy like Sam Bennett. Like
I think he's got like almost a point a game since he's got down to Florida.
And Florida's going to the playoffs, and guess what? Sam Bennett's point production is, I think it's double what his regular season point production is in the playoffs. And granted, that's by like nature and playing less games, but I mean, still to be producing it over a point per game in the playoffs every single year you're in the playoffs, that's just a huge bonus to add for a team.
I mean, this team also has serious depth issues, though, when you look at guys like Derek Ryan, Josh Levo, Brett Ritchie, Joachim Nordstrom.
Their defense is also really shoddy. That's really the thing.
Like, you look at these guys, and the fall-off in production is...
Noah has
like,
been at 15 points.
Yeah.
Like, you're basically getting next to zero production out of both your third and your fourth lines, which is just not going to cut it.
Didn't they trade... Dougie Hamilton for Noah Hannafin a couple years ago? Wasn't that the trade? It was like 1-for-1 straight up. Because I know Noah Hannafin was in Carolina, and I'm pretty sure Dougie Hamilton went to Calgary after Boston, right? You got traded from Boston to Calgary.
Dougie Hamilton. Let me see.
So like that trade, like talk about blowing up in your face. And that's not saying That's not saying Noah Hannafin's bad. I like Noah Hannafin. I think he's a ton of upside.
We're looking at these numbers though.
But that's kind of
Dougie Hamilton was traded for a first, which was Zachary Shenishin, and 2 second-round picks, which is Jacob Forsbacka Carlson and Jeremy Lozon.
Yeah, that was between Boston and Calgary, right?
And then Calgary and Carolina was... Hamilton was traded with Michael Furland and Adam Fox for Elias Lindholm and Noah Hannafin.
So God, Adam Fox was in that trade package. I forgot it. And then the Rangers got Adam Fox for a second-round pick out of Carolina. Oh, my God.
I mean, Lindholm's been... absolutely fantastic. He's exactly the kind of player this team needs. But, I mean, I mean, the bottom line, end of the day, the defense is questionable. Yeah, because they traded away
that guy.
Artyom.
They traded David Riddick, right?
Yeah.
Big save, Dave.
So
Zagadulin.
the defense has been what it is. It's
Played one game.
Didn't even start. Came in.
it's questionable once you get past, because you have Giordano, you have Chris Tanev, you have Noah Hannafin, who even if Hannafin's not scoring, not bad in his own zone, not great,
Definitely would rather him be putting up points than having to play in his own end, but
not bad. But then Rasmus Anderson is not bad. Like, the defense really, honestly, isn't. It's serviceable, especially when you consider Jacob Markstrom. It's serviceable, but I mean, listen, when your third liners are projected to put up less than 20 points, you've got a serious problem. There's an issue there.
I guarantee you they wish they'd hung on to Eric Gustafsson about now on defense. Like
Giordano's also kind of is on his way out. He
needs
to,
Yeah, I mean, he's not.
that
not
Norris
the same
Trophy
player.
was a swan song for him. I mean, that was it. That was essentially the final nail in the coffin, if you will. Like,
Yeah, no, he's just about done. He's got
the decline in like the level of play from Giordano is actually incredible. He went from being like okay all those years. I mean, everybody forgets he left the NHL to go play in the KHL and came back. Like he didn't come back until he was like 26 to play again. So like between then and then, like he was okay all those years, and then all of a sudden at 34 years old, the guy was an absolute fucking unit. He was putting up like 75 points a year. It was like, what happened? And then it like. And I think it was he had 85 points or 88
Something
points or something like that to win the
ridiculous.
Norris Trophy, and then like
Yeah.
the next year he put up like 25. It was just like he went up, and then just like off a cliff, like right into the water. It was like, oh my god.
I mean, I think Calgary right now is at a crossroads where, look, again, this is another roster that should be competing. I mean, these guys are hitting their 26 to 28 range, and they clearly invested in the team this year with Chris Tanev and Jacob Markstrom. There's going to be a couple things you need to address this off. I mean, obviously, first of all, you need a backup goaltender. Second of all, you need some depth on the wings. You need depth scoring, period. And third of all, you're going to need yet another top four style defenseman to take even more minutes off of Giordano. Like, there's a lot this team needs to address in the offseason. But if they do, they're going to be in a pretty good spot.
I just think it's funny.
It's just a lot.
Oh yeah. I just think it's really funny that Calgary went from like, remember 3-4 years ago everyone was talking about how Calgary might have like the best one of the best defensive cores in the NHL, and now it's like been piecemealed out, and like the various pieces are all over the NHL, and Calgary's left sitting here holding the bag.
Yeah.
I mean, they got Eric Gustafsson from Chicago, I think, who had like 60 points that year in Chicago, which was insane. Then he goes there, I think he had like a 45-point season with them, which is also kind of insane on a team that's not that great. So it's like, why let him walk and replace him with... I mean, listen, it's not that I don't like Chris Tanev. I really like Chris Tanev, but like, you can't replace 45 points on the blue line.
Chris Tanev is 8 points this season or something?
Yeah, I mean, and he's never been a point scorer. He's not like
he's a shot blocking defensive defender.
Yeah,
his whole thing, he was bought in to take the penalty kill minutes away from Giordano.
But the issue is they didn't address like the power play minutes that Giordano has. Like Noah Hannafin ideally would be that guy, but he struggled a little bit, and then he slid off the number one power play, and they stuck Gio back out there, and it's like, would you rather just run 5 forwards at this point? Like, and also imagine how crazy it would have been if Adam Fox wanted to stay in Calgary, how good that decor actually could have been. I mean, now he's in New York putting up Norris Trophy winning numbers. So
imagine he played with Giordano. It actually would have been nuts.
Oh my god, yeah, well, especially considering he would have played with him last year was his rookie year, right? Yeah. I feel like Adam Fox has been in the league forever just because how good he is.
He would have gotten... Giordano would have gotten a resurgence.
Oh, yeah, 100%. He would have had another, 60-point year just with Adam Fox.
100%. Would have been ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't know. The Flames are in an odd spot. I don't feel great about them. I don't feel terrible about them. They're kind of... They're in
I just wanted to talk about them because I feel like they're the team that, most in the NHL that represents, the biggest question mark. You know what I mean? All these other teams that are out of the playoffs to varying degrees, you can point at and say, okay, I know what direction they're going in. Outside of the Blue Jackets, who is the other big question mark, which is because they went from being primed to compete to being bad so fast that it's like, the hell happened? But all these other teams have, clear directions to go, right? Like Ottawa, Buffalo's got to, start a rebuild again. But, New Jersey, Ottawa...
Philly has an interesting position, though, to talk about.
I just think Philly needs to stay the course. I really don't think they need to do anything crazy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Change coaches and, just stay the course. Because,
Fire Lane and
Because they have all the talent on that back end to be super good. Like, Ivan Provorov has been amazing this year. Like,
I think the interesting thing, and I don't want this podcast to come off as like, oh, the guys just sit down and point fingers at coaches.
Yeah.
Point fingers at coaches for an hour. But there are certain teams that when you look at, it's very evident that it's not a player issue. And I think the Flyers more so, the Flyers and the Jackets are the two teams that I can point to and say there's very evidently a coaching issue. Because for all intents and purposes, the Flyers should have been a much better team this year. They were healthier.
Won the division, honestly.
They had Nolan Patrick healthy for the whole year for the most part. They had another year under Carter Hart's belt. The only major piece they lost was Matt Niskanen, who, great player, but this D-core should have been able to replace him. And yet the wheels fell off the wagon, and it's obviously that the defensive structure is not there anymore, which is a coaching problem. So I kind of agree. I think that they need to stay the course, maybe take a look at picking up like a bottom six penalty killing type defenseman just to kind of round things out.
Maybe like
bit.
A bruising bottom pair defenseman or something, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, other than that, they also just need certain players to just be better. I mean, Claude Giroux, let's be honest, he has to be better. There's just no...
He can't wait till like halfway through the season to decide to start playing. And then the other thing is, I mean, it's interesting. Like Philly, I see a lot of the same things in Philly that I saw at the end of AV's tenure with the Rangers. You know, granted it was 4 years and not one, but it's the same issues. Like the team can't defend the front of their net. Like they cough up rebounds like it's nobody's business. And I know Rob was talking about it before. They let passes come across the slot like they literally
open season.
They say cover the outsides and cover down low, and then just let the whole middle go.
Whereas most teams are comfortable like, yo, we're gonna push them to the outside. We're gonna keep them on the boards. They're like, no, guys, come and stand in the middle of the ice. Just come stand in. We're gonna stand on the outside.
The trapezoid is basically like free real estate.
It really is.
You just get to stand there and take shots at Carter Hart all day and wonder why they're going into net.
And unlike the Toronto Maple Leafs, who have the same problem, but they don't have... Philly didn't have Austin Matthews scoring 35 goals in 20-whatever games to get them out of the hole, you know? So, I also am really curious about Nolan Patrick. Because, like, this is a guy that's, what? He's like 6'3", 6'4", big kid. He was number 2 overall behind Nico Hischier. Had all this, you know, all the fucking hype. And he spent all of last year on the shelf because he had through no fault of his own, he's had concussion issues, right? Like, the guy might just have a soft head. Like, that's not to be mean, it might just be the truth. Like, some guys just can't take hits all the time. Like, Eric Lindros had the same issue. He's a big guy, get hit, you have a concussion. The issue is, like, Nolan Patrick is a guy that they need to be that number 2 center. Like, they can't keep relying on splitting up Giroux and Couturier and hoping that they both produce because they're very clearly better together.
They have so many centers on this team, and yet it seems to me like
even JVR can play center, for Christ's sake. Like,
I mean, they have Couturier, they have Giroux, they have Kevin Hayes. I mean, Nolan Patrick when he's healthy. Like, Nolan Patrick's had a rough year for sure. There's no taking away from that. But
minus 23.
You know, when you
rough.
miss essentially 3/4 of a year with a concussion,
and then the other quarter of it you're in bed because of a migraine every day.
I think you can excuse that.
Oh yeah,
you know. But that being said, I mean, there's gotta be an answer, and you can point all the fingers you want at saying Claude Giroux has good stats, but he has not played well. He just flat out has not played well.
Like when essentially he started playing well when the season was already out of hand. Like when they had already started sliding for like 6, 7, 8 games, he then all of a sudden was a point per game player and was the captain of the team. It's like, hey, where were you 4 games ago when we were only on a 2-game skid? Like, as if he hit his stride, say like he hits his stride a week or 2 earlier, they're still in a playoff conversation. They're still losing a bunch of games, but like he gives them a chance to win every single night.
He hit their first COVID stoppage and then just fell off.
Yep. And then for some reason a couple weeks and then later in the season decided to come back and play. It's like I don't know. They just when you're Claude Giroux and like you're the guy for all time. I mean, at one point Peter Laviolette literally said he was the best player in the league. Like he was trying to make that argument for this guy. And if you're really gonna say you're one of those guys that can be counted on, you have to produce. Like Sidney Crosby, yeah, he might have had some rough patches this year. The guy's still an animal. The guy's still going out there and producing. And I'm bringing up Sidney Crosby specifically because Giroux was the comparison that they used against Crosby back in like 2012, 2013 when they're trying to say he was better than Crosby. And it's like very clearly not the case. I mean, like nobody would ever make that argument ever. But when you're being compared to guys in that like of that ilk and in that upper echelon, you have to produce like those guys. And he's just not. He's just been bad. That being said, though, Shane Gostisbehere had a really hot start, played himself back into the lineup, then gets himself waived. Do you think, I mean, obviously his trade value is like next to nothing now, especially because he got that $4 million contract, but you think Philly tries to trade him for maybe some center help to try to shore up? Instead of going for like a bona fide number 2, they go for like a 2A, 2B setup with like Kevin Hayes and somebody else to try to take those minutes from Patrick, shift him to a wing and maybe say, hey, you're not going to get those tough matchup minutes anymore.
Maybe if they then use that money for another defenseman.
Well, yeah.
You can't trade Gostisbehere and then not pick up a defenseman.
Well, they have Cam York, who signed his contract. So, like, I mean, I understand what you're saying. Like, you don't want to bank on a kid like Cam York, who's only 19 years old.
Not with this roster.
No, absolutely not. But
because I think Giroux is, like, what, getting into his 30s now?
He's 32 or 33.
33. And that's not to take... listen. That's not to say that you can't insert youth into the lineup on a competitive team, but to expect, like, I don't know.
I just want to point out the fact, like, the look on Claude Giroux's face on his NHL.com player page is literally the expression that we had when we saw them slide. He was just like, oh my God, please. He's just staring up at the heavens.
I think that this is very much a team that they can't deal in question marks anymore. Because they tried for a couple of years with the question marks of the second line center. Can this kid do it? Can this kid do it? Can that guy do it? And the answer was no, no, no. They tried for a couple of years in net. Can this guy do it? Can that guy do it? No, no, no. More and more years on Giroux's body. More and more years on Voracek's body. You know, the time for question marks for this team, specifically because they keep failing on those question marks. They really haven't hit, except for like Joel Farabee, they really haven't hit on a question mark yet.
Considering all the flip side of all those decisions they made have blown up and gone on to be better, like trading Sergei Bobrovsky for a 3rd-round pick, and he goes on to win 2 Vezina trophies. Like, I know you just signed Brzgalov to that massive contract, but like Bobrovsky was what, like 23 or 24 when they traded him. It was like, I don't know about this.
They need guarantees on this team.
I just think they need. So I think they just need a direction. Like, they just need like a consistent like direction to be pulling in, because like they've had like 2 or 3 general managers over the last couple of years. It's kind of like the Pittsburgh Penguins, right? Like, once they fell out of like the definitive like super hyper competitive window, or like the Flyers case, when they fell out of like that rebuilding and they finally decided to be competitive, they had Hextall, then they had the guy from, was it Jim Rutherford for a while? No, Jim Rutherford went to Pittsburgh. I don't know.
I honestly couldn't even tell you.
Yeah, I just know they've had a ton of turnover, and it's like, I don't know. The Flyers are interesting. They also have had, like 6 coaches recently too, like AV, and then they had the guy that just won the Stanley Cup with St. Louis. He was their coach for a while. Craig Berube was their coach for a while.
It's bad when you know that guys that watch hockey every single day can't tell you like the line of coaches just because you have had so many. Like,
I couldn't tell you who's been the coach of the Edmonton Oilers all these years either. Like, they've had so many.
It's just bad, and it's not good for the youth either. Every time a new coach comes in, it's a new system. You're learning new philosophy. Players.
You essentially have to relearn to play the game every time you get a new coach.
So I mean, speaking of teams that are kind of in that question mark range, like, what team do you think is in the worst spot of these teams coming out not making the playoffs this year?
Can I see the list again? Sorry. See, like, I want to say Columbus.
We're talking about the bona fide ones?
Yeah.
The ones that are like definitely not making the playoffs this year. Ironically, I
wanted to say Columbus, but
I think it would either be Columbus. It's, to me, you can make a very strong argument for Columbus depending on what they do this offseason. I still think you can make a strong argument for really not all 3 of the LA teams, but not all 3 of the California teams. I still don't like the fact that they're still holding on to a lot of tradable pieces past the point of when they're tradable.
I think LA is in one of the worst positions after this offseason.
There's something to be said, like Steve said, for holding on to veterans, teaching the youth, role models and mentors.
But they're holding on to too much.
It just seems like they're holding on to these guys until they're past the point of being tradable, and now they're stuck with it.
I'd love to see them, I'd love to see them trade Kopitar, honestly.
Yeah, I just don't see them doing it. Like,
no, I don't.
Because they're gonna use him to turn Byfield into Kopitar 2.0.
Well, you see, that's the problem. He's
He's their Sidney Crosby. He's just not going anywhere.
It's like, remember one time you and I were talking to your dad and we were talking about Patrick Kane? It's like you're never gonna get an equal return for that because of what he means. Like Anze Kopitar won them 2 Stanley Cups. Like you're never gonna be able to like get
He's
the value.
also a point per game, I think, even now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Captain of their team for the last 3 or 4 years. Like you're never gonna get an equal return for him. So I don't mind them so much not moving on from Kopitar, but like it'd be smart to. You could get a really huge return.
I mean, I
for
said
him.
they should have traded Dustin Brown like 2 or 3 years ago.
And the interesting part about that is that now that after he got hurt, this is his value down. He's older and he's been hurt now.
They should have traded him 2 years. They should have traded him 3 years ago, and then they should have traded him at the beginning of the season when he was playing out of his mind.
Yeah, when he was
And
like
they just completely.
Before he got hurt.
Yeah, when he had he was 4th in the league
But
for
the
goals or
problem is
whatever.
they sat there and they saw that they were in a playoff spot, and for some reason they thought that was sustainable, and they thought Dustin Brown was going to sustain a 50-goal pace, which you don't exactly need to be Aristotle to see that shit not happening.
Considering he's never done it before in his career.
And like I said, they just missed so many opportunities to turn marketable pieces into future returns. So I think you can make a strong argument for really any 3 of those teams. I'm interested to see what Anaheim does this season. I think I've got to believe in my heart of hearts that John Gibson is going to get moved at some point. He's just too good not to. And this team is very clearly, even though they have good pieces, I love Jamie Drysdale, I love Trevor Zegras, I love Max Comtois, but by the time they're ready to compete, Gibson's going to be 30 years old. And he's earned a spot on a playoff team.
Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, if I had to pick one team, honestly,
I'm going to say the Buffalo Sabres.
I was going to say the Sabres. The issue with the Sabres is, let's be real here, okay? Let's not beat around the bush. You're not getting back what Jack Eichel is worth, because that would be astronomical. I think the asking price was 4 first-round picks and a prospect.
And a blue chip
You know,
prospect.
I would like to actually rephrase my answer to the Sabres, but the problem with the Sabres for me was that I didn't, even though we prospected them to be better, I truly never believed in the Sabres. So, to me, it's no difference that, like, the Sabres are the Oakland Raiders of the NHL.
You never
to
expect
me.
them to be good, but, like,
Occasionally they have a good season.
And
This isn't for anyone who's watching who's now a Raiders fan. This is not a currently accurate statement,
It's
but
just
like
for a long time you expected them
go
to
back
be better.
5 years and to go look back at that Raiders roster.
3 years ago, the Sabres looked like they were in a good spot. They were on the upswing. Like, they had a couple of rough seasons after Jack Eichel's rookie season, but they had some prospects, they had some new guys, and they never addressed any of the actual issues on the team.
So here's why I say they're in the worst spot, though, is just because, like, they're starting at square one again. Like, they have to go all the way back and tear it down. Whereas, like, LA's got some glaring holes. They need to draft some defensemen. LA needs to probably get a new goaltender. You know, there's some obvious issues with those teams, but, like Buffalo has to start all over because they're trading Jack Eichel. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that draft day comes, Jack Eichel is gone. Like, he has to be gone.
And this team, anyone who's on this team, does not want to be on this team anymore.
I mean,
Just about, I would say.
yeah. I mean, Ryan O'Reilly said it best. I mean, before he won his Conn Smythe, he said, like, the time he spent in Buffalo ruined his career. He did not like playing hockey. He hated it. He hated the organization. And I can't help but feel like a lot of these players feel the same way, just because they must feel like they're with chickens with their heads cut off, right? Like, they must feel like they're running around, like, just constantly changing directions, constantly getting new coaching. Like,
it's kind of like when we were younger playing. Like, it's impossible for you to compete when you cycle in good pieces, when you just are just set up for failure.
Yeah.
From the beginning, kind of.
So here's the problem with the Buffalo Sabres, and here's why my argument would be that they're arguably in the worst position. This is not a team like several other teams whose youth is young youth. You know, you trade away Jack Eichel. Reinhardt's 25. Ristolainen is 26. Jake McCabe is 27. I mean, these are guys that when they were younger were supposed to be coming into their own by now with a healthy team around them. I honestly look at this roster for the Buffalo Sabres. The only pieces I think that you should keep, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is Jukka-Pekka Luukkonen, and Rasmus Dahlin, because they're 22 and 21 years old respectively. Or Dahlin, I think, is only what, like 19, 20. So everyone else is at the point in their careers where they might genuinely not want to sit through a rebuild. Like if you ask Sam Reinhart, hey, can you commit to another 5-year rebuild? He's gonna say no. He's already 25 years old. He's already sat on a team for 7 years that has done absolutely nothing.
See, honestly, I would say to you that the other player that I would put in that untouchable category would have been Jack Eichel, right? Like if I was a team that was looking to rebuild, I'm not looking to move a guy like Jack Eichel. You just don't get a number one elite center like that. But I mean, their hands are going to be forced. They're going to have to trade him because he's not happy, and I don't blame him. I would want out too.
Yeah, so Dahlin is 2021.
Yeah.
But other guys like, Victor Olsen's already 25 years old. The only guys I would keep, honestly, is Luukkonen, Dahlin, and Henry Jokiharju. Everyone else, put them up for sale.
I'm really surprised, by the way, that they managed to get Henry Jokiharju out of Chicago, because Chicago needs some help on the blood. So they traded for the other Nylander brother, who's been terrible. Like
they're just, the Sabres are in a position where if they are going to rebuild, all of these other pieces that they've built up over the years are going with that rebuild. They're not staying.
Hey, you. Even if you don't believe in my boys, I will.
Yeah.
Let's go, Simbas.
It's just they're in such a bad spot because other teams like the Ducks can start their rebuild now and hold on to pieces like Trevor Zegras and Jamie Drysdale. Whereas the Sabres are starting a rebuild, and even guys that are relatively young are probably going to want out because they've been subjected to this awful brand of hockey for so many years.
So, you know how you said you don't want this to come across as like us just shitting on coaches for an hour? Well, I'm going to change this up. I really think that the problem with the Buffalo Sabres has never been like the personnel, like the players really, as much as it's been like just terrible management, like the worst mismanagement. Like ownership has been bad. The general managers have all been bad. I mean, Ottawa looked the same way for a while. Ottawa had a lot of the same issues, but they managed to put their heads on straight and actually like put a decent organization on the ice.
Well, we'll see if Pierre Dorian lets them pay
Thomas Chabot.
Well,
not Chabot.
Not Pierre Dorian. Eugene Melnick. We'll see if he actually
opens
lets
his
the
checkbook.
GM pay the players, because that's been Otto's problem. Is Eugene Melnick always goes to GMs, and the GM's like, "Hey, we need to pay Erik Karlsson $10 million. I don't have an option here," and he goes, "No, I'm not paying it."
Yeah, and they drive him out of town.
I have a this is from our hot takes. This was a note from a disgruntled Sabres fan. Censored. The Sabres are something bad. And our front office and owner don't give two shits about us.
Yeah, it's true. Well, because not for nothing. Like Buffalo is a hockey city. Like it's the team's been there for 41 years. Oh, 51 years actually.
They had their 50th season last year. Yeah.
So 51 years, but that they're always going to be second fiddle to the Buffalo Bills. That's just the reality of it. But like, it almost feels like that their ownership group is settling for being less than the Buffalo Bills, because like they don't spend money, and when they do spend money, it makes absolutely no sense, and then they end up, it always blows up in their face. Like do you remember in 2012 they went on that like 11 game winning streak to get like 1 point out of the playoffs and then fell off? I remember thinking to myself that year, wow, the Buffalo Sabres are in a really good spot. Like they add some youth to this. They have Ryan Miller. They should be in a playoff spot next year. They still had like a Jason Pominville in his prime. Wheels fell off immediately, and when I thought it couldn't get any worse, they managed to not only keep driving the car with no wheels, they blew its transmission up, and then they drove it off the Brooklyn Bridge. So, like,
I think that the Buffalo Sabres are rivaled. There's only one team in the league that rivals the level of blinders that the general managers put on, and that's the Edmonton Oilers, in my opinion. A team that has such glaringly obvious deficiencies. So obvious that you could blindfold me, put me in a field 10 miles away, sit down a iPad mini in the dirt with the Buffalo Sabres logo, and I could tell you, yeah, they need goaltending and defense. Same thing with the Oilers. I could tell you, yeah, they have never had a goaltender, essentially since Happy Bullen retired.
Yeah. Well, so you know what's funny? You know what this reminds me a lot of? Do you remember? Obviously, you remember being an Islander fan. It almost feels like the Islanders, like from the Mike Milbury era all the way into like the early, like the Garth Snow era when he got fired. Like, it's the same thing. Like you look at it, and you're just like, what are you thinking? Like, how many times are you guys gonna restart this rebuild? Like, you've done it 3 times already. You're going to do it a 4th time? Like,
YOLO.
And it really it looks more and more like the Islanders situation, and just in that, like, it looks more and more like John Tavares to me. It's like, even if you don't trade Jack Eichel and you force him to play out his contract here, right? And then what? He walks? You walk away with nothing? Like, it's the same thing. It just makes no sense. And like you said, there's such glaring deficiencies. Like, literally, like, bullseye, like, red cape, like, you cannot miss this. And the GM goes, defense? I'm going to sign Taylor Hall.
I think we need scoring wingers. And it's like, yeah, does Jack Eichel need somebody to play with? 100%. But sign Taylor Hall and also get yourself an actual starting goaltender.
Or
no offense
some
to
defensive
Linus
pieces.
Ullmark, because Linus Ullmark had a great breakout season, something I didn't anticipate, but still wasn't good enough because defense is outside of Dahlin and Ristolainen. Jake McKay was banged up this year. Henry Jokiharju is only 21 years old.
That's really it. Like, I feel like if they wanted to stick with Ullmark because they were feeling confident about him, because he has been decent for them compared to, like, how bad the team has been, I would have been like, okay, that's fine. Like, that's not a big deal because you can get by with, like, so-so goaltending for the most part. But, like, the real issue is, like, they didn't go out and get any help on the defensive end. If they went out and signed Taylor Hall and then signed, like, 2 bottom pairing or, like, a number 3 and, like, a number 6 defenseman, I'm like, okay, they're in a better spot. And I think, like, or if you go out and sign some defensemen, I feel like Jack Eichel would be willing to wait on the scoring help because he's like, okay, well, we're trying to beef up our back end. We're going to be a little more defensive this year. And then maybe some young guys like Dylan Cousins or Tage Thompson, like, take a step next year, and now he has the help he needs, you know? Because you really could have done this all internally. Like, there were so many ways that Buffalo could have done this the right way, and they stared all of them in the face and said, no, I'm going to do this so backwards.
You know, the other issue is we're talking about this past offseason, but in the reality of the situation was this past offseason was essentially a desperation attempt to convince Jack Eichel to stay around. Realistically speaking, these issues should have been addressed 2, 3, 4 years ago. And they've been the same issues that they've had 2, 3, 4 years in the process.
I don't understand.
Like Carter Hutton was your starting goaltender a couple years ago, and everyone knew he's a 1B at best. This guy needs some help. You never addressed it. Everyone saw Ristolainen and Dahlin taking those extra steps, and you're like, they're great. They need a little bit of help. You know, these are problems that should have been dealt with, or at least that should have had some kind of plan to be dealt with. And essentially the clock was at 11:59, and they said, oh, God, we need to fix this. But then they didn't do anything besides, like, push the hand forward by signing Taylor Hall and having him score, like, 2 goals. Like, you know, and it's just frustrating, even as a guy that, you know, I don't really hold any emotional investment in the Buffalo Sabres outside of the fact that I really do like Jack Eichel a lot. He's one of my favorite players. But even for me, it's frustrating seeing this team do the same thing year after year when, look, I have no experience in any level of management of hockey outside of coaching a women's league, beer league, deck hockey team. That's it. And even I can sit here and tell you, yeah, you have some problems that, you know, that need to be addressed. This isn't a team like, you know, I think a good example of a team like the Flyers, for example. You know, this isn't a team where you're like, well, you could do this, you could do that, you could go for the second line center, you could beef up the defense, maybe try a new coach. This is a team where it's like, look, A, B, C, these are the problems. These are very obvious issues, and yet there's been no answer to these problems.
Well, because they didn't afford themselves the opportunity to be like, oh, well, maybe we can take a shot on this or maybe a shot on this, because they skipped on A, B, and C every other time. Whereas, like, you saw the Flyers go through the process of A, we're going to draft Claude Giroux, B, we're going to develop Claude Giroux, we're going to also draft Ivan Provorov, and then C, we're going to play Ivan Provorov. You know, like, they built their team, and Buffalo's like, but what if we went right to C? Like, what if we don't draft anybody or do anything? Or what if we could just go straight from A to D? Like, we're going to skip everything in between and try everything else. And it's like, okay, but, like, you have to, it's like baby steps. You have to learn to walk before you can run. You can't go from being a terrible team to in the Stanley Cup playoffs overnight. Like, it doesn't happen. There's some growing pains. There's some time. And that's what these last 4 years with Jack Eichel should have been. Those growing pains should all be gone by now.
And yet their most successful season was his rookie season.
Yeah, they've been worse every single year since.
You know, like I said, it's a very similar situation to the Oilers where every year they're out of the playoffs in the first round or they're missing the playoffs entirely. and they're sitting there questioning, well, we have the two of the best players in the league. What's wrong? Well, it's like, hey, you haven't had a goalie worth talking about since Cam Talbot's first season there, and his seasons after were mediocre.
And the defense was pretty bad
Yeah.
too. So like it's
So
not
it's
all
like,
on Cam Talbot.
No,
but yeah.
but it was obvious that there needed to be some adjustments on the back end and goaltending that they just didn't do. And yet, here we are. It's 2021, and we're going into the playoffs with Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen. So, a very similar situation in Buffalo where I honestly couldn't tell you what management was thinking because it's so
Convoluted.
asinine and beyond logic. So, I don't know. I feel bad for Sabres fans. I really do, but, it's just a reality of the situation.
So out of these teams that are out of the playoffs, like the bona fide like teams that have been eliminated already, which one do you think is going to be the next team to like cross, like take their next step and actually like move into like the phase where they're probably going to start being a bubble team more so than like I would wager probably the Blackhawks just by nature of like Patrick Kane still being there, and if
And JT coming back.
And if they could sign like a goaltender in the offseason, like to help out Malcolm Subban to like take the minutes from him, then I think they'd be in a decent spot because their back end is old, but like guys like Duncan Keith are still serviceable. I mean, Brent Seabrook retired this year, I'm pretty sure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrew Shaw,
Did I cut you off?
Yeah, he retired too. No, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
On a side note.
Yeah.
I think are you asking like what team is gonna make the playoffs next? Essentially,
I just think which one of these teams do you think is gonna like? Which one do you think is gonna take the next step? Like, because we were talking about which teams are like primed to be in the best spot, and like I guess best spot is like subjective to these teams. So I guess which team do you think is the closest to taking the next step and actually playing meaningful games?
I mean probably the Blackhawks just because they're not even essentially rebuilding; they're essentially retooling. Like they're probably the closest to once again being a playoff contender. It's not sustainable, I don't think. I don't really see this team.
It's the Crosby effect, essentially, is what it is. Like, as long as you have Patrick Kane on the roster, you kind of have to push for a position.
And what I mean by not sustainable is they have really good pieces. I love Kirby Dach. I love DeBrincat. I love the other guy, the winger.
Oh, Dominic Kubalik.
Yes, thank you. I love Dach. I love Kubalik. I love DeBrincat.
And even Strom's been really good for them.
Dylan Strom's good, but there's questions as far as I'm going to pump the brakes on Kevin Lankinen because we've seen this kind of thing before where some young hotshot goalie comes in, he's the hottest thing for a season, and the next season he's not good. I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm not taking anything away from what he's done this year. He's been great for them, but I'm going to pump the brakes on him. I just don't see as many pieces that are going to be needed to sustain a success for long term. That being said, are they the closest to making the playoffs at this point? Probably. I think they'll be competing for a playoff spot within probably even next year, honestly.
So here's an interesting little thought experiment for you, right? So if Boston buys into the Halak, Jeremy Swayman tandem, right, because they don't want to pay Tuukka Rask at the end of the year, if you're Scotty Bowman's son, Stan, right, the GM, do you take a shot on a guy like Tuukka Rask on like a 2-year deal? Because he has the pedigree, right? He's been to 2 Stanley Cup finals. Has never won a Stanley Cup. Only ever won it as a backup. Has never been able to take his team all the way there. Not through any fault of his own. I mean, like Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final, like this, they should have won. But
I think it depends on who's available.
I think
just
Tuukka
in
Rask
terms
is
of
the biggest one.
Because my other thought is Anderson might be available and he's a little bit younger. And Anderson buys you a little bit more time to develop somebody behind him. I think
Right.
Rask is already like
35,
34, 35.
I was just saying Tuukka Rask because I was thinking like he might, like I know Anderson's pretty much on the way out of Toronto because they have Jack Campbell now. Like they're going to go with all in on him, which I think is a mistake. Like, listen, like
They also just hate Anderson for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, and you know better than anybody that like I was a big fan of Jack Campbell in juniors. I thought his run at the World Juniors Championship was crazy, but
So Anderson's 31 and Rask is 34. So
yeah,
I think if both are available, I think Chicago would be better off taking a swing at Anderson only because it's gonna buy you a little bit more time to maybe find that guy to develop. Whereas Rask is really only buying you a year or two.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I don't think Rask is any sort of long-term solution at all.
Well,
I was just thinking
I'm saying
like
because like for the long-term health of the organization, it would be better to have Anderson for 3 to 4 years, develop somebody behind him, and then have him take over when Anderson's done, as opposed to potentially finding somebody to develop, but Rask only gives you 1 or 2 years, then you have to force this kid in before he's ready.
Or you
know?
have to do what Edmonton has been doing, which is just cycling in like 40-year-old goaltenders to
Yeah.
just stop the gap. Yeah,
It's not a bad idea if Anderson does, for some strange reason, end up re-signing in Toronto. And I don't even, honestly, the whole Anderson situation, I don't really know if it's so much that Toronto doesn't want Anderson so much as Anderson doesn't want Toronto at this point.
I think it's both. I think for a while, like they were like, well, we're not so high on him anymore, and Anderson was like, I've given you everything, blood, sweat, and tears, and you guys have done nothing but step on me, so I'm out.
So I think it's an interesting situation. I did actually, kind of, not to wrap up, but to kind of enter into like kind of final thoughts. Out of the teams that are out of the playoffs, let's assume they all have an equal chance at drafting this guy. Oh my God, the goalie in the draft.
Oh, Jesper Wallstedt?
Yeah, which one of these teams do you think would be the best fit for a guy like Jesper Wallstedt?
The LA Kings.
You think the Kings would be the best one?
100%. They have Cal Peterson, who can play now, and they can leave Peterson in there and let Jonathan Quick back him up. And then you have, eventually you could either have him, you essentially you just have Jonathan Quick for those years that you're developing Wallstedt to like mentor him. And I mean, who's better to mentor him? Maybe Henrik Lundqvist. Like, there's very few goaltenders that I would argue are like would be a better person to like learn from than Jonathan Quick. So I mean, that's a good option for him. I mean, and any of the California teams, honestly, because even Anaheim, like trading John Gibson, could use getting Jesper Wallstedt as like the chip they use to move him. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I just think like LA would be perfect because then it would just solidify LA's rebuild because then they could only focus on getting defensemen and they would be fine. Whereas like Anaheim gets him, but then it's like, okay, well now we still need forwards and defensemen.
Yeah.
Like,
what do you think, Tim? Who do you think out of these teams, again, assuming they all have an equal chance to draft Jesper Wallstedt, who do you think should be taking a chance at the goalie?
Who should be taking the chance at the goalie instead of a different player, or is the?
I'm saying like who should be like who do you think was
like the best fit?
Is in the market for a goalie as opposed to like a forward or a defenseman at this point? Because honestly, I think I agree with Steve. It's either LA or Detroit for me, because Detroit, to my knowledge, doesn't have really a young guy in a system that I can think of off the top of my head.
See, the only reason I don't say Detroit is because Detroit needs everything. Like Detroit's in another situation where like they're like
going to be
4
taking the
years
best
out.
available player. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I mean, if it gets down to them, say for example the lottery kind of screws them and they get down to like the 4th or 5th, you might take them.
Jesper Wallstedt's interesting just in that like him and Askarov are the only two guys I could think of coming so highly touted out of the draft. Like that, I'll include Spencer Knight.
I think the Ducks could benefit from him if they wind up moving Gibson.
You think it's just like I think that
I think it's like they essentially just because let's be honest, the Ducks aren't gonna be good for a while, and
I mean
John Gibson's not gonna stay there much longer.
It also is a good option because like then you don't have to worry about it because like if you draft him and you're not good for 5 years and he takes 4 years to develop, like who gives a shit? Like you just leave him there and you let him develop,
And even
There's
then,
no rush.
Let's say he's a flash in the pan goalie and he has 2 excellent years. In 2 years, you have a great trade. You have a great trading prospect now.
And I just think like it is. It's a good fit too because like LA is a little interesting because like figure of LA like Jonathan Quick retires, right, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh well, we have Wallstedt, and they feel like they have to force him in, kind of like what the Philadelphia Flyers did with Carter Hart. Like they felt like their hand was forced just by like nature of Carter Hart being so good. So it's interesting. Like I think
the Rangers.
Yeah, I think Anaheim might be in a really nice spot for him just because like he could develop at his own pace and not have to worry about like rushing or accelerating his timeline. But like, yeah, no, like I said, the California teams are really good fits for him. San Jose is just kind of a mess though.
I've always been a big fan. Sorry, Tim, do you have something to say?
No, but if I was going to say something, I would just say that San Jose actually is a super mess, and that's why I just don't even.
I kind of avoided them when you asked like who's in the worst shape, and it's like I avoided the San Jose Sharks just because like we all kind of like feel that way. Like they're terrible, right? Like
the thing about the Sharks though is they have a potential energy. They really do have a lot of potential in terms of the fact that they have not started the rebuild, but they have tradable assets. Like Logan Couture at this point is still very much a tradable asset. They have Brent Burns and Erik Karlsson, who are still very much tradable assets. So they have a lot of potential for a good rebuild because if they bite the bullet and truly commit and just say, it's nice to have old mentors, but listen, we're just going to get as many pieces as we can out of these guys while we can. They have a lot of assets that they can move to get a lot of picks. Like, they could end up easily, out of all those guys, they could end up with like an extra 3 first-round picks.
I mean, remember what Detroit looked like a couple years ago? They had like 9 picks in the first 2 rounds or something ridiculous. Like,
so I don't think they're in necessarily a bad spot, but they need to commit to the rebuild, because if they don't, then 2 or 3 years from now, they will be in arguably the worst spot in the NHL.
Yeah, that's fair.
I liked any of the California teams for Wallstat because I'm a big fan of building from the net out. I think it's the best way to do it. I think you always should build from the net out because you don't want to end up a team like Edmonton Oilers, who have these superstar elite forwards. I'll say a serviceable defense. They have some nice pieces, and then your goaltending is just
Yeah.
So I think like building from the net out is super important. A lot of the successful teams we've seen over the last couple of years have built from the net out. I mean, think about the New York Rangers for so many years built from the net out with Henrik Lundqvist, right?
The LA Kings, who we were just talking about, built from the net out with Jonathan Quick.
Yeah, so you always should build from the net out, in my opinion, and I think that's a good match for Jesper Wallstedt, especially because none of those teams are going to be competing anytime soon, so he can take all the time in the world that he wants.
See, it's funny. I agree with you that you should build from the net out, but I still think like my philosophy for it is like if you get a number 1 center, the only thing harder to get than like a starting franchise goaltender is a number 1 center. So like given the opportunity, but like I don't think there's any like elite center iceman really here that these teams would want to pick over a guy like Jesper Wallstedt, who's projected to be like the second coming of Christ apparently. Like this kid's apparently disgusting. Like he's got like franchise potential everywhere I've seen him in NHL. Like, which again, like the NHL video game series is not how you rate prospects, but still. So apparently,
like even the pundits, they're all saying like he's,
that's exactly it. Like, and then you look at the mock drafts, he's going in like the top 10, and like again, outside of Spencer Knight and Yaroslav Askarov, when was the last time you had a goaltender go in the top 10? Carey Price in 2006.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting for sure. Do you guys have any final thoughts on any of these teams?
There was something today. Who just got put? Jonathan Drouin on long-term injured reserve.
Yeah,
but technically still being healthy.
I do want to address that situation. So Jonathan Drouin took a personal leave of absence from the Montreal Canadiens, and we're not going to speculate. I don't want to speculate because they said it was for personal reasons. So obviously we wish him the best of whatever he's dealing with. We have no idea. Nobody really knows why he left, and it's not really my place to speculate on that, and we're not going to turn into the Toronto Sun here. So obviously we just want to wish him the best with whatever it is that he's dealing with.
And I just want to say, like, if you are going to go out and speculate, that you're a snake. You're the same reason that Robin Lehner had to go out there and say, no, I'm not depressed and I'm not having issues. I have a concussion, which is against league protocol right now. You're not supposed to disclose your injuries. So for something like that, like
he's breaking a lot of protocols as of recently with his talk, and not that it's a bad thing, but I'm just saying like he's clearly not caring at all with what the league has to say.
And it's honestly good for him though, because like the amount of times the media speculates on his behalf and like just says all these awful things about him. It's like, oh, did he relapse? Is he having like another addiction problem? It's like, no, the guy could just be hurt. Same thing with Drouin. Like, oh, is it like a mental thing? Is like the media too tough on him? Who cares? Like honestly. He'll tell us when he wants. He'll tell us when he wants to, or he might not. He might never tell us. The reality is, it's none of our fucking business. Like, these are people. They have lives. They have families. That being said, I do want to point out though that the Montreal media has been especially tough on Jonathan Drouin, and that's only because hindsight is 2020. Looking back on it, that Sergachev for Drouin trade was a good trade in 2013. I don't care, or not 2013, 2014. I don't care who you are. After the season Drouin had in Tampa Bay, like essentially supplanting Steven Stamkos, who was on the shelf all year with that blood clot, they were in the market for a number 1 center. They needed one. They traded for him. They traded Sergachev. They didn't. Obviously, Sergachev had all the upside. Nobody thought he was going to turn around and be a number 1 defenseman 3 years later. So it's hindsight. So it's really just unfair of them to lay into this guy when in reality, if the team's been bad, he's had really no help, and now that he has help, he's been playing better.
He's also been hurt.
He gets hurt a lot. I mean, he's a smaller guy. That's kind of it. Like, it's not his fault that Ovechkin tried to take his head off last year, you know?
Yeah, so, we just want to wish him the best at whatever ends up happening. And any other final last minute.
Tim, you mentioned Andrew Shaw, right? He retired.
Oh, yeah. Andrew Shaw did retire due to concussions.
We want to wish Hot Dog Water all the best.
As it's always funny when a guy retires, especially a guy as polarizing as Andrew Shaw, because like I'm not gonna beat around the bush. When he played, I hated him. I absolutely hated Andrew Shaw. I thought he was a dirty player. I didn't like him. I thought he was a scumbag. And if you ask me my opinion of him as a hockey player, I'm gonna tell you the same thing. Him retiring does not make him any less of a scumbag on the ice.
No,
I'm not taking that away from him. Did he have a good career though? Absolutely. I mean, one of the most efficient, consistent third or fourth line power forwards that the Blackhawks ever had.
Can't argue with 2 Stanley Cup championships, you know?
Like, the guy had a great career. I'm not taking anything away from him. So, the fact they had to retire due to concussions is unfortunate. It's just a reality of our sport. Some guys, you get that first one and they just don't stop coming after that. And he's making a decision to prioritize his future health for being there for his family, and I can't fault him for that at all. I mean, he's making a very respectable decision. So, personally, I know he's not listening to this. Andrew, if you're listening to this, you'll probably get a kick out of the fact that I hated you so much. Like, that'll probably make you smile just because that's the kind of guy he was. He loved making people mad. So
you could tell he loved getting booed. He loved it.
So, Andrew, I hated you. I really thought you were a scumbag, dirtbag for a long time. But honestly, you had a good career, bud. So
congratulations, man.
It's like when Tom Wilson retires. Still gonna hate his guts, but
still gonna have to say congratulations. You had a great career. Like. It's like every shithead you actually work with when like they retire. You're like, yeah, thanks, Ted. Have a great retirement. You had a great career. But like, Ted always jams the printer. Like always destroys the bathroom on you.
There's a fat shit in the toilet. Doesn't flush.
It's not like Andrew Shaw was on the level of like a Raffi Torres, who I couldn't have been happier when he wasn't signed. And
I would have told Raffi Torres to eat shit. Like that's how I feel about that guy, even though he retired.
Like Shaw was a dirty player for sure, but at the end of the day, he did walk the line with a modicum of respect, and he knew when he had to answer the bell, and for that I have to give him credit.
Yeah, to me he's like a Carcillo in that sense. Like I hated Daniel Carcillo, absolutely despised Daniel Carcillo. He earned my respect though. The guy, when the bell rang, he answered it, and like he knew his place. So
I think he's a shithead for other reasons post retirement.
Yeah. That's a whole podcast of itself. Like his whole like concussion crusade he's on and everything.
Despite the fact that guy handed out more concussions than only everyone except for Raffi Torres.
You think that maybe that's why he's such a crusader? He's like, look at what I got away with. Look at this.
100%. 10,000%.
He's like, bro, I was out here murdering guys left and right every night.
Like, yeah, well, maybe if you didn't elbow people in the head every night, maybe some guys would have a couple fewer concussions.
Maybe Mark Savard would still be playing, but hey. Well, he wouldn't still be playing, but he would have finished his career.
Have had a better end to his career.
Instead of taking an elbow to the temple and then never playing hockey again.
I know Tim wants to give his fantasy hockey update, which, by the way, fuck you, Connor McDavid. You're a dick.
So we have our weekly fantasy update. So we're in the week of the finals. So we got a very fair matchup between Rob and Chris after Chris and Jeremy threw all of their shit at the wall last week.
Oh my god.
Chris wound up winning with like what was the total? I'll get the total up one sec. The total was
dumb close, I think.
It was 359 to 325, Chris, with 76 starts to Jeremy's 79.
That's ridiculous. 79 starts, bro.
Yeah, pretty
Holy
crazy.
hell. I think the most I ever used at any point this season was like 55, and that's because I was in a dogfight with Jeremy.
It's almost max start every day.
Yeah.
I lost to Rob 221 to 226, but now this week we have me and Jeremy's third place game going.
Yeah. Only won by 5 points?
I said 2.
You said 221 to 226.
I meant to say 251.
Okay. I was like, I only won by 5 points.
No, it was 251 to 226. My mistake. This week, Jeremy and I have a little mini matchup going for the third place game. The score right now is roughly 30 to 28. So we have a nice little matchup going. But we'll see what happens with Chris and Rob this week after Chris's stunts last week.
Well, he has another week, right? Next week's the last week of the final.
Last week is the last week, so
Oh, we have a gentleman's agreement, so.
Yeah, but if he might have burned too many starts at this point.
The gentleman's agreement was because he burned too many starts.
Mm-hmm.
The issue I'm having right now is that Chris literally has 36 points from 2 players because Merzlikins put up a 41-shot shutout and McDavid put up 3 goals and an assist on the Jets. So, 36 of his points came from 2 players. So, thanks to the Detroit Red Wings for that one. Somehow you put up 41 shots and you didn't score a single goal. You actually played a decent game for once, but you still took a 0-0 shutout into the shootout, so you guys are kind of jackasses.
You could have been the Dallas Stars, who were down 1-0, out shooting the team 36-6.
Yeah, and they only won in overtime.
Yeah, and they had to put up 55 shots to do it.
Yeah.
Thomas Greiss and Jonathan Bernier, kind of good.
Yeah, it's almost like
1A, 1B options were plentiful this season in the off season.
It's almost like I said the Oilers maybe should have taken a look at Thomas Greiss, but
or maybe even Jonathan Bernier. He couldn't have been he couldn't have been much worse than Mikko Koskinen.
And before you Oilers fans come at me in the comments with, oh, but look at his stats. I could give 2 shits what Mike Smith's stats are because he had good stats last year. And how far did you go in the playoffs? So I don't give a crap that the guy has a 2.25 goals against average. You have to watch the games, and the 2 goals that he's letting in are absolute trash.
Not even that. Look at like you said, look at the playoffs last year. They got into that play-in round against Chicago, and it was the most awful pee-wee level hockey I've ever. It was like watching 2 cadet teams down at the rink. Honestly, the games were ending 6-4, 8-7. It was ridiculous. It was oh wow, neither team has any goaltending. But what did Edmonton do? They doubled down and re-signed Mike Smith.
They said, well, how do we fix goaltending issues? Sign the goalie we have.
Score more goals.
Let's get the exact same goalie tandem in the next year and hope that for some reason it's going to be different. Despite the fact that they're both 38.
And despite the fact that Connor McDavid is also having a career year again. The guy's on pace. He's going to score 100 points. He could do it. He could score 100 points this season in his 56-game season. Guy's an animal.
And yet, you would think with a guy like that they would be first in the division with a locked-up playoff spot. Or they'd be
in a... could you imagine talking about Wayne Gretzky this way? Oh, yeah, Wayne Gretzky, scoring 150 points, 92 goals, but his team's missing the playoffs every year.
I'll put it to you this way. If the Edmonton Oilers, with their 58 points, were in the East Division, they would not be in the playoffs. So, just gonna leave it at that.
Mm-hmm. They're just as good as the Rangers are.
So next podcast, probably like I said, next episode we'll have a more defined picture of who's in the playoffs. It's not going to be set in stone just yet because the East Division is basically just a crapshoot every night. Who the hell knows what's going to happen with this division? The West Division will probably be locked up by then.
So with the Vancouver Canucks and all their makeup games, when is their last game of the season? Is it 2 weeks from now?
They end up, so they go past the...
They go into the playoffs. They're going to be playing games still when the playoffs are supposed to be starting, I think.
They go past the week, the makeup... I think they go past the makeup week, and then... it kind of works out for the league just because they're not a playoff team, if they were in the playoff hunt, then this would be, really kind of bad for the league because it'd be now we have to,
You have to stop everything.
We have to make sure all these guys, or not even that, but, you have, the league would be, still in flux for those 2 weeks. But, by the time their schedule is done, their playoffs will be more or less, locked up already. But they go past, so this is...
They go all the way to the end of May?
This is the week that the season was supposed to end, so they go past the makeup week.
They go 2 weeks into the...
But
because the playoffs are still going to start when they're playing these games. The Eastern Conference playoffs are going to be starting whether or not these guys are done with their season or not.
I don't know what the league is going to do, but
That's what they've been
assuming
saying.
That Calgary is also out of the playoffs, they might as well, because at that point, who really cares?
Essentially just exhibition games.
The only games that are going to be an issue is this one against Edmonton because it's a playoff team. But if I'm Edmonton,
and the
I'm not
Winnipeg Jets team as well.
Yeah, but I'm if I'm Edmonton, I'm not playing my guys. I'm going to leave McDavid on the bench and I'm going to leave him in the locker room and everything. There's no reason to risk them getting hurt. You're playing. You essentially got handed an extra 2 weeks of the season.
I think we'll honestly probably see preseason hockey out there.
I could see Vancouver just throwing a bunch of young
why
guys
not,
in the
right?
There's nothing on the line from either team.
You might as honestly those last 3 games against Calgary at the bottom of that playoffs, you might as well try to lose those for a better pick. So,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, next week, I mean, we'll see what happens with the NHL news. But like I said, we'll have a better image of who's going to be in the playoffs, who's not. Maybe at that point, we'll talk about some of these tweener teams if they are eliminated at that point. Like, say, for example, if by that time the New York Rangers are officially eliminated, right? Like, we'll talk about the New York Rangers. Or if by that time somebody like the Arizona Coyotes are officially eliminated, maybe we'll talk about some of those tweener teams. But it depends on how things shake out. Some of these divisions are tight, some of them aren't. And we're just going to have to see what happens. So next week depends on how things shake out. So I guess don't have really a plan for next week. But I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys again next time.
Shea Weber's a scumbag forever.